Thank you for being here. I know it's really a graveyard shift. Everybody's eaten. We've got to be really, really exciting. So we're not going to dance, but
we could.
we could.
We could, if you ask nicely.
Yeah. I'll leave that to you, Shakes.
Shakes will do that for us. But I guess today we're here to talk about one of my favorite things, how to make money out of data, legally, of course. So just putting that out there. We've got a panel. I don't think I'll do them justice by introducing them. So we're going to start with a little bit of a different introduction, so no rapping, but we do have Lee, as we've heard. We've got Yasin and Shakes. I call him Shakes. That's Shager and Roberto Naidu, but Shakes, we can work with it today. Just take us through it. I've read some really boring information about Data Dividend, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is really not for me. I'm going to leave it to you guys to do a little bit of an introduction on what you do in your current role, how you engage with payment data, what's exciting, what can I do, how can I make some money. I'll pretend nobody heard that. But over to you, Lee, and then we'll have Yasin's insights and Shakes. Go ahead.
Thanks, Nadine. I guess in a post-lunch slump, it's good to give everybody a reality check. So let's start there. So let's talk about South Africa. Highest income Gini in the world at 0.67. So 31 years into our democracy, we're still the most unequal society. We've got unemployment north of 33% and 2/3 of our youth unemployed. We're a drag on sub-Saharan Africa with the GDP coming at 1.6% and the region coming in at almost 4%. So we're kind of holding everybody back. What else in the data is worrying? Well, when we talk about payments, it's interesting, but we're a very unequal society. So today, there are 28.4 million people that have access to the credit market. Only 8.3 million have got current debt. The other 20 million are back on their payments to the lending system. So when you think about the question about the dividend, the question is, what are we trying to achieve? And I think we're trying to do a couple things. One, we're trying to figure out a way to make this country more equal. Today, we have 43 million adults in South Africa, and 16 million of them have hopes and dreams, like you and I, but they actually aren't able to access the financial system. Not because they don't have hopes and dreams, but because we aren't able to see them for their hopes and their dreams, because the systems we have are limited, and the rails we have don't see them for their potential. So if we get this right, 31 years into our democracy, the question is, how will we know? Well, in our lifetime, we'll hopefully have a better life for all our people, not just the 28.4 million people that the credit bureaus can see. So going over to the notion of data dividends, you should think of it in three ways. One, there's a revenue-focused data dividend. In the whole world, the mobile wallet market, which is a non-fiat based mechanism of holding money, is worth $1 trillion. 70% is in Africa. We don't like physical money. We don't trust physical money. South Africa is the most westernized country in South Africa. Other countries, you won't see cash, right? I have a client in one of our African countries that does 6 million loans a day, one client, right? Wow. Could your entity do that? Do you have the rails to pull it off? And so when you think about inclusion and having the rails of connectivity, we think about having a standard like ISO 20022 and a way for us to see the potential in people. So revenue is available to not just grow the pockets of Nadine and the entities in the room, but if we get this right, we can grow the economy as well. So revenue is available, because we all of us are looking for good customers right now. The good customers aren't there. There's a limited bunch of them, and if the data is right, only 8.3 of them can pay their bills every month. The question is, where else is there money within the economy? So there's a revenue dividend available, so that's important. For most people in the room, you're actually more interested in the efficacy and the efficiency of the payment rails. In the post-lunch slump, it's probably equally important to say that Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa are probably the three most fraudulent economies on the continent. Not a prize you want, calm down, right? So with that in mind, some place like Kenya probably has 70% of all online applications for money being fraudulent upstream at point of application. So when you think about why we want to do a data dividend, very similar to the demographic dividend or the window of opportunity, is if we start to talk the same language, we start to see more. There were a few examples in the previous panel around some of the elements that make it possible. For example, in our business, we are able to now score a device. We have something called a device reputation score. You may be good, but if I add your device into the mix, it changes who you are. So what we want to understand as payment providers within the entire rail is, what are we able to do to see better and make better decisions? The cost of fraud, the cost of payment, these are all things we can become more efficient at. And like in the previous panel, we struggle with explainability, right? And if we're able to explain these things, we become more trustworthy. And we struggle with trust in a country where we don't like money, we don't trust the traditional system, 31 years into our democracy. The third thing is probably what I call the social dividend. If we get this right, we should be able to see the impact of what we do. So let me make it real for all of you. So we have 125 years worth of data. Today, if you wanted to buy a brand new cheapest car, according to the bank serve data, you should be able to afford or earn 21,000 Rand a month. The average take-home pay in South Africa is 18,000. You can't actually afford the cheapest new car available. So when you think about the social dividend, it all connects between how we work, the impact we have, the better life for all. And that is the post-lunch kind of starting point, right? If we get this right, and when we do get this right, the impact will be far-reaching. Growth in GDP, better inclusion, better take-home pays, better empowerment. Because financial inclusion isn't about storing your money. It's moving from storing your money to having leverage with your money to create a better life for all people. And let me give you one final stat. It isn't anyone in the room that will impact the employment numbers. South Africa and Africa more generally, we hire people through our SMMEs. Small businesses account for 80% of all employment on the continent. You can hire as many people as you want to for each of your businesses because you feel compelled by my narrative today. It won't actually make a difference. We need to find a way to get SMMEs enabled and sustainable so they can hire 1 to 5 people, which is the average number of people they hire, and that will create demand-side drivers for all of us to grow our economy. So it is possible. I've given you the framework of how we think about it, but it's more than what you think. We've got to think more cohesively about the data dividend, how it affects the payment architecture.
Thank you for that, Lee. I think for me, yeah, I started very positively, but now...
I'm sorry I made you sad.
Sorry you made me sad, but Yasin, tell us a little bit about how you're getting your hands into the payment data. What are you doing from a financial institution and commercial perspective? What are you doing to make me feel less sad? Yeah.
I'll try my best. Thanks, Nadine, and thanks for all of the geeks that's come to a data session after lunch. And for those who aren't geeks and want to be converted, I think you're in the right place. So, Nadine, I've had the benefit of wrangling data or turning chaos into charts, from everything from the Forex desk to cash, to devices, to distribution, and then payments. I think payments is a nice way to distill it. So a wise man called Dr. Strange once says we are now in the end game, and I think payments is that end game after being through all of those other data elements. From a commercial bank perspective and understanding payments, it seems almost like it's not rocket science to understand what the data dividend is, right? At a highly superficial level, you look at it and say, banks, you have tons of information on clients, you have tons of information on transaction, you have a lot of information on saving, you have a lot of information about lending. Surely it's a no-brainer that you utilize this and extract economic value. And I think that's fair. It is, at that superficial level, it's not rocket science. Where the kicker lies actually is in understanding that you actually multiply that revenue when that data is shared. And interestingly, it's when it's shared with the person on whom that data is actually based. We see examples of this all the time. So there's a couple of good examples. There's Vitality Money, there's eBucks, there's UCount Rewards. And all of this is premised on the idea that the banks can extract data. They utilize that data to understand their clients. They then reward clients for transacting in a manner that they want them to transact in. customers then transact in that manner because there's a reward for them, right? And after they've transacted in that manner, banks then get the reward because every single tap, every single swipe, every single transfer of funds is one additional piece of data that then feeds into the cycle. But I don't think that should be news to any of us. We've seen that. So that's the part where we all nod politely in the meeting, in the strategy meeting, as yes, we understand. The second part, and this is the part that we all like to pretend that we understand really well, and the previous session took us to some of the buzzwords. So I'll dispel with some of the buzzwords, and I'll get through them quickly. We'll go through AI-generated insights, and we'll go through hyper-personalization and hyper-segmentation and intelligent fraud detections. They have said it, and we can pass on that. I think the reality is that's kind of low-hanging fruit based on the democratization of AI. I'm also a bit afraid of what to say after listening to Lauren in the previous session. I might just be divulging too much and opening myself up to some significant data risks. That said, though, I think what's really at the frontier of data is about how do we understand that the real data dividend is not in the data that we have currently. It's in the data that we can extract going into the future. And that's where payments data is the linchpin. So as an example, if we are able to understand the propensity for a client to utilize digital transaction means, it gives us a very good indication of that client's propensity to adopt another digital type of transaction and a completely different revenue stream for the bank. And that's where value lies. Once that adoption happens, again, it's more data, more insights, more direction. That is ultimately the real dividend that you get. It's the ability to create more data points and extract that. And I think that is what we should be focusing on.
But maybe just to add to that, are you saying it's an internal extraction and an external extraction? So on the analysis side, you've got to have multi-faceted data that you're using. I'm just making sure we understand the process. So it's not just your financial institution data. It's the extraction. It's how you manage to include the external, but making sure that you cover the compliance elements.
Exactly.
So it's larger than just your standard, internal internal you get from a customer.
Correct.
We've moved way past that. So
collaboration is actually very key. Yeah. So I think on the stage today, you have Lee, you have Shags, you have a commercial bank. All of us, in effect, integrate with each other in one way or another. Yeah. But integrating with each other is very different to collaborating with each other for data. And that's important. That's probably the next big step that we take around, and we'll probably discuss this, around where we see gaps in where data is going.
What's the pitfall?
So, as an example, I put this out there, that the loan analyst doesn't reap the dividend. And trust me, I've been an analyst. I haven't reaped any dividends. I'm hoping that Nadine gives me a bit of a pay packet after this. But the reality is, it's the ecosystem that benefits from the dividend. And the way that the ecosystem benefits, whether it's an internal ecosystem or in the payments world, the payment ecosystem, that benefit is derived from that collaboration, expanding your data frontiers, and getting more and more data as intelligently as possible.
Shags, over to you. We've heard transparency, we've heard collaboration. Take us through the paying cleanse. What are you thinking? What do you do with all that centralized data? How do you deal it?
So, to quote another wise man, with great power comes great responsibility. Right? Hey, I saw you and I had to raise it. Right? As paying, I was almost going to use the old name, but I caught myself.
Or the switch,
There are fines that are floating around you don't understand. We are a systemically important payment system financial market infrastructure. I had to say that as well, because my colleagues know I've got a tick box that as well as a quota. But that designation is very important, because what it means is that we have a responsibility to be able to support the policymakers and to support the industry in which we play that role. Now, the data that we see through going through paying systems, I mean, we process billions and billions of transactions to the value of trillions of rands. And it was in keeping with that position and that privileged position that we decided a couple of years ago, I'd say a couple, it was back in 2012, to be able to create an index which is called the Paying Economic Index, and then we've got the Pay Net Salary Index. And the reason for that was that we recognized that we sit with all this data, and we have a responsibility to be able to share this data in the form of the indices and to be able to give the policymakers, the industry, regulators, academics, and so forth, insights into what is happening in the ecosystem through that data. And one of the things, I mean, the recent Paying Economic Index came out yesterday. Now, one of the things that we've correlated or developed with the index was that the index was going to become a now-cost indicator. And it's got a 97.1% correlation to GDP. So it serves a very good role in being able to give an indication of the direction in which GDP and the economy is performing. The most recent data indicated that in the last quarter there was a 1.1% uptick. Now we know that the economy, based on retail numbers that came out overnight, there was a 2.3% uptick in the retail space. So we know that all of these things are correlating. There is this correlation between what we're seeing and the indexes that we're putting out and what we're seeing coming out through the likes of your Stats SA and so forth. So this is just an example when you talk about the data dividend and the importance of being able to use that data for being able to drive these large-scale initiatives. And in keeping with our role as a systemically important financial market infrastructure, and with the whole ecosystem developments as well, in terms of the payments ecosystem modernization and the realization of the importance of that data and using the data that sits at the center, all of these things will be able to drive and to be able to assist your big policymakers. So you're bringing in your Operation Vulindlela considerations, you're bringing in Mzansi in terms of development and creation of digital public infrastructure. All of these are looking and leveraging data that sits in the middle to be able to give the policymakers those insights. Because data is really the superpower of a country, right? And Lee stole my thunder with all of those lovely facts that he brought in at the outset. I was going to talk about our Gini coefficient and you know, I mean, but the reality is that is the reality of South Africa, right?
Yeah.
We're 31 years later, and we're still in this invidious position where it is up to us to be able to put in place the systems and the processes to be able to make those changes. And that's one of the benefits of bringing people into the payment system. That's one of the reasons why we are so intentional about driving digital payments and bringing those that are marginalized, that are more cash-based, bringing them into the system, because that then allows those transaction flows to be able to go through the system and to then be able to feed the data engines, which allows for deeper insights. And when you're talking about all of these things, I mean, this is one of the reasons. So when you're talking about your digital public infrastructure, I think it was about a week ago that Mzansi Exchange was announced, and this forms part of the My Mzansi initiative, which is aimed at enhancing South Africa's digital public infrastructure. And the objective there is to be able to create easier data sharing between government levels, as well as to allow for real-time data sharing when it comes to your compliance and verification and so forth. So think about the impact that this can have for people that are applying for their SASSA grants, for people that are for NSFAS grants and disbursements and so forth. So all of these things are, for me, the benefit of having an end, or to have this global view that's now being driven from the top, and you find that there's a recognition that at the South African level, we have to address the infrastructure issues that we've got to be able to allow for that data dividend to be maximized.
Absolutely. I think so. We've touched on a little bit about, we see it's a hidden gem. We know data is the way forward. But my biggest concern, I think, is the pitfalls. So is regulation friend or foe? So do you need compliance? How much privacy do I really need? Let's go a little bit through what is the delta and value of payment data, and the contrary, which is the pitfalls. Why are we not getting it right in South Africa? I know we touched on, unemployment, literally no growth. So what do we need to do to catch up? Why are we falling behind? Who could we reach out to? What lessons are there to learn? Who's ahead of us? What are we doing with our African counterparts? What's the next step to at least help us enhance the value of data?
Okay. Thank you, Nadine. That's a good question. I think it's probably worth saying up front that our business carries 15,000 data elements, right? And that's more than I can think of. I wouldn't know where to start. They aren't all as valuable. And I think if you took all our data elements together across these three businesses, for example, it's just way too much. We still wouldn't know what to do with it. So the question, though, is how valuable is payment data? In the last panel, we spoke about AI, and one of the biggest things we look at, for example, actuarial models and credit scoring is explainability, right? To the SARB, to the FISCA, we need to be able to explain these things. What I'd say to you, where we are today at this conference, I can tell you unequivocally that cash flow data on payments is more important than collateral data, right? Because the people that don't have collateral. But what they do have is behavior, and the behavior sits in the cash flow. I'll give you a real example of something we've just launched a few weeks ago as a pilot. You remember earlier I said that there's 16 million adults excluded from the financial economy. She was trying to figure out, how do I get to those people? Because they don't come into banks and lenders. Even paying doesn't know who they are, right? So what we found was that every person in South Africa...
You never know.
No jabs,
So
guys.
what we did find was that everybody does, in fact, have a cell phone, right?
Yes.
And so we did an 18-month study, Shagrin, to figure out whether in the data we could infer a pattern for inclusion. After about 18 months, we found that of the 16 million people, using just one telco, we could profile 1.9 million people for inclusion in the financial economy. Not to get them a car, but to start the journey. Because we all start our journey in retail. It's a retail small amount of money. But for the first time, we could see that. And right now, we're busy live testing it with a few customers, and then we'll take that live. So is this novel? Absolutely. Is it hard? Extremely hard, because I'm not even sure whether it'll fully work. And so your question was around how difficult is this? Very difficult, right? And there's a couple of things to think about, and I'll give you examples of who's getting it right. But one, for us to drive the inclusive growth that you're looking for, Nadine, we've got to push the boundaries in our current thinking. Those that have can afford to come to this convention. Those that don't have want to have better lives. We aren't targeting them. So how do we drive down deeper? So one of the challenges we have, and I keep referring to ISO 20022, we need enriched data to allow us to see a cohesive view. So a couple of things come to my mind is one, we are doing a lot of work, Shugs, on the banking side, on the formal lending side. There's many fintechs in the room. We need the non-bank lenders to have a singular view of this. One of the problems we have with problems like fraud, which makes us scared to lend, is we have concepts like microloan stacking, where you stack loans on top of each other. If we all can see the same shared data, we're able to deal with concerns like fraud. Remember, trust is one of our biggest problems in Africa. So one of the challenges I'd call out first is that we aren't equally sharing this common data, neither are we fully embracing common enriched data sets, which we are on track to do in any event. My colleagues will confirm in a second. That's the first thing. Secondly, we are a South African market where GDPR type legislation like POPIA, it is sacrosanct. You cannot ignore it.
Yes.
Getting a customer's consent is super important in whatever we do. So you can test, you can pilot, but in the end, the customer is in fact king and queen. So that's something we can't ignore. The third thing is that in this world we live in, I mentioned earlier that we are the biggest market in Africa from a geographic perspective that participates in mobile wallet transactions with the rise of MTN Mobile, VodaPay, and 20 years ago, M-Pesa. That's all frictionless transactions. We like putting friction into stuff. We want people to give us paper and do this and do that. It's a huge deterrent of us actually fast tracking. So who's getting this right? I would call out Nigeria and Kenya as the leading examples. Most lenders in those markets are doing millions of transactions.
Notwithstanding the fraud.
Notwithstanding the fraud. And remember, fraud is all relative, right?
Yeah.
It's your ability to measure and to provide for some of these challenges. What we do as an organization is try to figure out ways to deal with this. So for example, something as simple as before a transaction starts, figuring out the propensity of a transaction being fraudulent at a device level and forcing it on a manual funnel, right? Yeah. Being able to do multiple validations and not just multi-factor authentication. There are many ways to do these things. But where we are in South Africa, and I've already told you, we're kind of holding back sub-Saharan Africa. West Africa is running away at their own pace. I think we've got to think differently about this. To go back to Shurg's one-liner, with great risks comes great rewards, right? We've got to think about that as well because there are vanguard plays available. I always tell people M-Pesa was invented before Bitcoin was a thing, right? Then Momo came along and Momo's had more transactions than M-Pesa's had in a much, much shorter space of time. So with great risk does come great rewards. If we all are scared, we should go back into our houses and hide under the bed. But the world is going digital. It's not going to stop. It's going to increase. And things like explainability, user consent, removing friction, using the assets we have in this shared economy, which is an old concept that we need to revive again, is also important. And this point about the shared economy, stop doing things by yourself, right? There are things that you're really good at doing, and the guy next to you on the left and the right, they are as good or better. Work with them, because no one actually cares how we do it. They care about what we do. So as much as you ask what are the challenges, I would say the opportunity and the potential outweighs those challenges. And for almost every challenge we've had, there's a solution to it. And if we don't get this right, we will actually lose our potential positioning within the free trade agreement where there's a lot of growth, some 18% just over the last few years. We've got to position strongly to think about cross-border trade, cross-border movement, African-wide protocols. Otherwise, we'll be isolated as a country that's highly westernized and doesn't want to play ball with our neighbors.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, collaboration is not a word, people. The audience needs to get that. Cohesion, we have to be open to opportunity. Risk is reward. We're going to turn it a little bit to regulation, and I know in a commercial sense or financial institution lens. Tell me what you think about it. Is it holding you back? Is it worth it? Is it too stringent? Should we be reconsidering the risk-based approach when it comes to the way we interpret certain risk levels for data? What are you seeing in your space, Yassine?
I think the safeguards for data and why we protect it are quite clear. And at the heart of it is being responsible about how we hold and how we utilize customer data. And I think that's valid for anybody who holds customer data within the economy. To say that it's holding us back, I don't think that's not necessarily the case. I think we work around the safeguards that we have. I think on a more broader topic, just to pick up on what some of the opportunities that Lee raised, you did ask me to try and make you feel a bit happy about it all. I think that there's a lot of positives. One is we've already extracted a lot of dividend. The other positive is that right now we're actually under-leveraging. We're under-leveraging the data that we have. So as Lee said, we collect tons of data. And when we collect it as if it's gold.
Yes.
But then we treat it as if it's gravel. So it's siloed, it's discarded in a lot of instances. That's
heavily classified. Yeah.
that's the dichotomy we have to sort out. The second part of it is that while we've developed great rails, great architecture, great ways of dealing with customer data and regulation, we haven't at the same pace developed the culture around data, the culture around extracting as much value as we can. And we see this in something like ISO 20022, as Lee said. We think of it as a messaging upgrade. It's not a messaging upgrade. It's actually a data revolution. So where in the past we had a view of a transaction, now we actually have a view of context, of purpose, of relationships between clients. And that's kind of the ecosystem that we need to build. That's effectively what we build on for training our next-gen AI models, where it doesn't become about volume and value and timestamps and training in that sense. It becomes around relationships and context and purpose of transactions and behavior. And once we've gotten that right, I think that's when we start really leveraging data to an extent where it can be shared across all of us, and it has the benefit of giving social dividends, actual rands and cents dividends, which we all like, and then the regulatory and macroeconomic dividends that Czech sees. That's ultimately where we get to, but that's ultimately what the opportunity ahead of us is. It's about us leveraging it to the proper extent.
Absolutely. Sheikhs, let's just turn a little bit to data fluidity. I know we've touched on all the buzzwords for AI. Tell me, what is it, and how do you see the shift from monetization of payment data? What is it that we need to do? Step one.
Well, if you're asking me about how to monetize payments data, I can see my CPSO looking there and saying, okay, I'd love to hear this as part of the strategy. So between the two of us, we're probably going to have to co-create here. But taking it back to our role as a financial market infrastructure, and when you're thinking about data in the context of all of the various factors that both Lee and Yassine had just spoken about. But for me, I still want to be able to demonstrate the value and the importance of data. Sorry, am I losing it? Okay. The importance of that data in being able to uplift the economy. And because for me, that's the real monetization that I would be looking at it through that lens. Because by leveraging that data effectively to be able to pick the economy up, you've got this effect of a rising tide lifting all boats, right? So if anyone, how many of you are familiar with the book Why Nations Fail by Acemoglu and Robinson? They talk about inclusive institutions. And they say that inclusive institutions are what are required in order for a society to prosper and to succeed. The contrary to that is that extractive institutions are those that actually take away from society and take away from prosperity in society in that regard. Now, inclusive institutions are those in which there's things like regulatory certainty, individuals have an understanding of so there's ability to, you've got your vote, you've got all of these good things that go with having a well-run, well-functioning society. And when you juxtapose that in the context of what is happening now to be able to address our infrastructure issues, you require well-functioning infrastructure to be able to uplift the economy, to be able to provide us with all of these good things that we're looking for, and to bring more people into the economy. Earlier in the talk, I know Justice Malala and Justice and Prof. Adrian Seville had a little fireside chat, and I think Adrian had asked Justice about that. And Justice said that things like your media, things like your judiciary, all of these are institutions that are very, very important to be able to uplift society. In the same vein, the central bank is one of those inclusive institutions. The central bank has a responsibility additional they've obviously got the monetary policy responsibility, the financial stability, but they've now brought payments into the fold as well as part of their 2030 strategic objectives, right? And just by doing that, and by creating this program called the Payments Ecosystem Modernization, which has as its objective the aim of bringing more disenfranchised or people that are on the outskirts into the more digital-based economy, and essentially the red dot. So that's why I'm wearing my red tie, right? Because that's what they talk about, the red dot. And that, for me, will have the opportunity of uplifting society. And there was a stat that they've indicated in the PEM paper that by bringing more people into digital payments, it'll take up the economy, the GDP, by 0.5%. So that's more or less in that zero. I know Adrian spoke about 0.7% this morning. So you're looking in that ballpark. Let's round it off at 0.6%, right? Hey, that's not a bad thing. So yeah.
Thank you. So we've got 5 minutes, and I'm going to try and get through 3 questions. I think we've covered regulation. I want to start with one from Kahisho. And this one I think we'll direct at Yasin, because we're talking data. Who should own this data? If the data is owned by a consumer, shouldn't the consumer also benefit financially from their data being used? How does this link to PAPIA?
That's an excellent question. Let's sell it back to the clients, Kahisho. Let's not be the big bad wolf bank. Ultimately, the owner of the data is the data subject. The unfortunate reality is, as you're probably alluding to, that the beneficiary of that data is not necessarily the data subject. So even in the reward programs we speak about, we've utilized customer data, aggregated it, created some trends around it, and then sold it back to a customer for a piece of the reward. I think there is some monetization that we have to think about and say, how does the individual monetize its data? I think the challenge will come across is that a lot of the benefit lies not in the individual one element of data. Where the real benefit lies in us being able to aggregate whoever's in this room as an example, and then being able to make rational estimations about that. And that's where we see the value being driven out of it. So ultimately what you're going to get to is if we had to get to a point of then returning the value of that dividend to the individual, it becomes really fractions upon fractions of the share of the total value that we derive. I think it's an interesting one. It's something that we have to ponder about and see how we give it back. And when we start collaborating across multiple different segments and sharing data for the benefit ultimately of the consumer, is that benefit actually a rands and cents dividend? Or are we happy to say that there's sufficient social benefit that's been delivered to the social dividend?
Thanks, Yasin. Sorry to cut you a bit short, but I do still need to get 2 questions out there. So Mr. Steve Makuchete, I hope I've said that correctly, has asked a question, and I'm going to direct it to Lee. It says, how can data collaboration between banks and fintechs be structured to protect both competitive advantage and consumer privacy?
That's a really good question. It's interesting, Shog, you've said financial market infrastructure 5 times. That's sunk in my head.
Sorry, but I've done my job.
What I'd say to you, though, there's 2 answers. One, we should adopt these standards, specifically 222, right? It's a standard for collaboration, and standards allow us to come together. That's one thing. The second thing is, the alternative data marketplace, but now in 2030 in Africa, is worth $10 billion. There's a concept, if you haven't heard about it, it's called privacy-preserving collaboration, right? And what that means is that we're looking for signals of change, signals in that noise, right? And what privacy-preserving collaboration allows us to do, and there are players like Omniscient and there's other clean room players. Omniscient is actually a South African-based fintech that's doing pretty well here. But they're able to actually find a way to share the signal with another party without giving away the actual explicit data that's protected under POPIA. So if you aren't building out rails to the sharing economy using privacy-preserving collaboration, that's where I'd start. But my first point is that lending actually is not for the full remit or purview of formal lenders. The fintechs are going to win. The telcos will become fintechs. Stop trying to protect what is not yours to protect.
Okay, I've just had a look at our questions, and I think we've covered quite a bit. Just one nugget of hope and advice from each of you. You've got literally 20 seconds each. Please go ahead. Sheks?
One thing that we need to do is to realize, and I think the guys have just touched on each of this, touched on this in their previous points, is that we have to understand how we can actually work together to be able to collaborate and understand what are those levers. Because when you're combating fraud, you need to be able to share the data. So there has to be these agreements and understandings. We can't use things like Poppy as an excuse to be able to say, sorry, this is now my data and I'm ring-fencing it. So collaboration.
Yasin?
So I'll leave you with this, and it's in a similar vein. I think if we really want to be serious about extracting a dividend, we've got to be serious about the richness of data, we've got to be serious about the collaboration, and we've got to be serious about the quality of our data. AI isn't coming for our jobs, it's coming for our data blind spots.
Ah, that's a great
Yeah,
one.
that's a good one.
Yeah.
And
Over
maybe
to
the last one I'd say, to build on what the guys have said, I believe that we're focusing on the wrong things. We're going to focus on the outcomes we want, and the outcome is a more inclusive society, trust in our systems, and GDP growth. That's what I think it is. But to allow us to do that, we've got to figure out that this room that's full of people should think as one entity,
unit,
right?
yeah.
As one unit. Because you actually, if we all win, we must win together. But if we try and fight each other, we're all going to lose, or some will lose. And we can't have us losing. What prevents us from not being successful is this competitive behavior.
Yes.
If you chat to someone like Kakisha that travels Africa as well, we find that the fintechs are collaborating with the central bank, collaborating with other entities. Together, we can achieve the Africa we want.
Yeah, absolutely.